in your perceptions of predestination versus free will and how those two fit together. Do they fit together? Are they polar opposites, or, you know, two sides of the same coin? Or so just interested in your perspective on that.
Yeah. No, it's great question.
Thank you. We rehearsed it all afternoon.
Okay, I gotta take off some clothing for this one.
Yeah, warm it up.
Yeah. The question that you have to ask yourself, I think, is predestination or free will for whom? For whom? Right? So you always look, these things that seem like really difficult questions, you know, often it's good to look for the joker in the deck. Has someone planted a joker in the deck? And usually someone has, and usually it's us. Okay. And the joker is usually some unexamined assumption or some undefined term. So what I'm doing right now is bigger than this particular question. This may be helpful to you and to you all in looking at some of this other stuff when the song is not available to kick this stuff around. Look at what's the undefined term or the unexamined assumption, and kind of the ultimate unexamined assumption is the definition of I. You know, when we say, okay, predestination for whom? Or free will for whom? Well, we say for me. Right? For me. But who's that me? Oh, that's Dean. Right? Do I have, as soon as we start talking about, do I have free will? See, what comes along with that? I've got desires. I've got goals. I've got, right? I've got free will that's a personal thing. There's some proprietorship there. Right? There's like, okay, here's the world and certain things are happening in the world, and here's me, here's Dean at a certain place in the world sitting here on a chair in Santa Monica, and there's certain places I want to get, certain things I want to do. Do I have the freedom to do that? Right? Or is predestination happening? Are there all these just these forces of the universe, forces of cause and effect? You know, sometimes here's another unexamined assumption. Often, sometimes people say predestination as if, right, there's a destination that we're headed for, and before we even start off, like our ticket is punched. Right. So some people will mean that. Some people will mean in a more, maybe, let's say, more scientific way, there's just all these forces of nature that are bigger than we are, and even what we think of as our own desires. What has formed my desires? Well, I have total freedom. I can decide I want to, go over to the, the ice cream store and go. But what has formed that desire? Right? All these forces of nature, the whole history, what my parents fed me, right? All this stuff that's bigger than I am. Right? So the term that runs through all that, whether we're saying, yeah, I think predestination is the deal, or no, I think free will is the deal. Those, right? If one person takes the free will position, one person takes the predestination position, that's like 180 degrees. They're completely contradicting each other.
Right.
But what they're agreeing on is the premise of the thing, which is the personal identity. Who is it that has free will, or who is it that's predestined? It's Dean, or it's Shannon, right? It's an individual. It's a separate self. It's a self which has an identity separate from the rest of the universe. Now, what the You put it in terms of what Eastern mysticism says. Historically, okay, that's a, yeah. That's
well,
pretty much
only
understood.
because I
Yes.
understand, you know, some of the Western culture. You know,
Right,
lived in
right.
it my whole life. I
Ex-
get that.
Exactly, exactly. So, right, historically, the Eastern cultures have been more conscientious about preserving this now alternative perspective, which is you're not a separate self. You're not a separate self, right? The- if you're a
Which would lean into predestination then,
well, why?
because if I'm not a separate self, what it comes down to then is if you're watching the wave in the ocean, which is
Hmm.
the predestination, you
Hmm.
can't tell which of the little grains of sand are going to be moved.
Right.
The predestination is the wave is coming, and then how it affects the individual pieces of grain. You know,
Hmm.
the little grains of sand is, you know, am I a grain of sand or am I
Hmm.
part of the wave, or are they the same thing?
Right. You know,
You know,
interesting.
one being more energy, the wave,
Yeah.
and the other being more corporeal, the sand.
Interestingly, I think one of the most kind of provocative statements on this, one of the most helpful statements on this, was from a Western physicist. I'm trying to remember who it was. Was it Schrodinger or no? Someone from that era, though, early 20th century. I can't remember right now who it was. And I should look this up. And what he said was along the lines of the paradox is that when we look at others, when we look at other people, we see them being, we see their whole course of action. We see everything happening to them being determined by outside forces, right? When we look at others, we can see. I mean, if we had perfect vision, which of course we don't, but if we could, we in principle, we can see, if we could see everything that happened to a person from the moment of their birth and before that, what influenced their parents and what, you know, trace it back to the Big Bang. If we could see all those complex chains of cause and effect, we could see that you deciding, okay, I'm going to cross the street here in the middle of the block, or no, I'm going to go down to the corner and wait for the light to turn green. That's completely determined
Right.
by all these complex chains of cause and effect from the Big Bang coming down to right now in that moment, you making that decision. So what he said was, when we observe others, what we see is, oh, everything is completely determined. Right? I think determined is a better, more precise word than, you know, predestined,
Predestined.
because that brings
Agreed.
in this other stuff. So let's say determined. It's right? So the paradox is, when we observe others, we see everything is determined. But when we examine within ourselves, we feel very clearly and very simply, no, I got a choice. I can pick up the bowl or not pick up the bowl. All right? So we see the whole universe. On the one hand, the whole universe is determined. On the other hand, we feel from the inside freedom to make choices. Now,
Okay.
now, what he said, what this Western physicist said, wish I could remember who it was, is that the resolution of the paradox, what this is forcing us to see, is that the will that we experience, right? We have, that's an experience, not just a thing of logic. We experience what it feels like right now. You know, move your finger or don't move your finger, or move this finger or move that finger, right? You experience that something that's the making the choice, and that freedom. But then you look at that from the inside. From the outside, you look at the whole universe and see it's determined. So he said the only way to resolve the paradox is to realize that the will that we experience from the inside here is the will that's determining the whole universe.
Okay, but if you take the word determined, although it's very similar to predestined, the implication to predestined is that there is something, someone, some whatever that is setting up the plan. And that's kind of what I'm really trying to get at, because in the Christian side of things, you know, God would have the position of predestining. And it's not so much determined. Determined would be more outside of any intelligent personality, you know, predictable, in other words. Whereas predestined has more of a puppet master, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, that would be one interpretation of that. That would be one way to go with that, which I guess is what a lot of people have in mind when they use those words. But the thing, you know enough to look at that and go, that's a dualistic model.
True.
That's a dualistic model. And a lot of this stuff, you know, when that's put in these dualistic terms, there is an intuition of something that's deeply true, which is, I think, why people are drawn to it. There's an intuition of something that's deeply true. But because the non-dual perspective is so simple and so kind of almost, I don't want to say delicate, fragile, subtle, you know, it's you know, once you add one little extra feather of complexity to it, it's no longer non-dualism, right? The moment you dilute the purity of it just a little bit, you get, and we're always tempted to do that. So then we put things in terms of, oh, there's going to be a puppet master, right? If I'm a puppet, there has to be a puppet master. That makes a certain kind of sense, right? If we're looking at things in dualistic terms, which most people are doing most of the time, right? But what I would suggest is, when we don't see the puppet, right? I got to do the visual here. I have to take my mic with me.
Get out of the screen.
Right. See, now when we only see the puppet, hi boys and girls, right? Okay, there's the puppet, and then there's oh, hi Punch, hi Judy, oh, I hate you, oh, I love you, right? Okay, all the drama, all the conflict, the love, the hate, all that, right? And they're separate beings. They're separate beings. And they appear to be exercising free will. Maybe someone says, you know what, Punch, I'm starting to suspect there's someone controlling us, right? Right? Okay. So there's some hidden force. Where is it? All right. Now, then we pull at the end of the show, right? The puppet master comes up, sticks his head up into the puppet theater and takes a bow, right? Okay, now I'm starting to have fun with this, right? That's at the end of the show, presumably at the end of our lives, or, you know, at the end of our many lifetimes, when the, you know, final truth, final nirvana is revealed. We see the whole scheme of things, right? At the end of the show, the puppet master takes a bow. But all this time, are there separate selves? Are the puppets separate from the puppet master? It's all just the puppet master talking to himself, right? Right? This is where does this leave off and this begin? Right?
Which is a very quantum perspective, in that we are not separate beings.
Yeah. It's
okay.
Yeah. I would say it's a real perspective, and, you know, anything that approaches reality, you know, quantum physics, as it approaches reality, as you say, the Eastern mysticisms, as they approach reality, come to the understanding of a thing that, you know, that you've experienced and that you're continuing to experience with more and more clarity. I thought once upon a time I had this what I thought was a clear idea that there was a separate, independent, autonomous entity called Shannon. It lives in a bag of skin that separates it from the universe. It's tagged with a name, right? We've all been bagged and tagged. But gee, I sit down in meditation, I close my eyes, I do some deep sighing or whatever, and then just be, and all that stuff melts away. And yet this, all the stuff, all the attributes, all the Shannon-like stuff, all the history, all the facts of me as a woman as opposed to a man, as a female, as a human as opposed to an animal or a plant. Everything melts away except beingness. And it becomes more and more clear that beingness, awareness, aware presence, whatever word we want to use, which is always going to be, one word too much, that I am, right? Aham Brahmasmi, I am that. I am Brahman. And not just I, but, you too. Tat Twamasi, thou art that. All this is nothing but that. That alone is. Right? We always come back to that. And, once you realize, once you experience the infinite, there's no room for anything else. And there's no room for two infinites. Otherwise, there's got to be a place where
it wouldn't be infinite.
Exactly. Then there's a place where my infinite ends and yours begins. So there can only be one of them, and it's what we all are, and we get that experiential window into it every time we meditate, and that window keeps getting, more wide and wide open. So more and more we're walking around in the cognition, in the recognition of that. Okay. And then these questions, it gets clearer when you come, because we've been used to thinking of these questions from our old perspective. Right? It's like, yes, there you go. There you go. There's like when you're a kid, you're growing up, like there's certain stuff my mom said. My mom was a fountain of information and misinformation. And because I was a kid, I didn't know which was which. And some of the stuff, I don't know where, she said, never pinch anyone because that can turn into cancer.
Right. They all told us that.
Oh, really? Who said that, Irene?
Yeah.
Yeah, you were told that too? That wasn't just my mom. Okay. So that was some mythology from that generation, maybe. Right. I don't know how many generations. And the thing is that there was not a moment where I went, okay, now I'm a grown-up and I got to sit down and examine everything my mother told me and sort out, which the good stuff from the bullshit, right?
Right.
But every once in a while something would come up and I go, what? Wait a minute. Did she say that? Right? So kind of in a similar way, right? We've thought about these questions during our kind of philosophical childhood, right? We were used to think, and now we've graduated past that. But there's a lag. Sometimes our thoughts about these things are kind of a, what they call in financial word, it's a lagging indicator. Right? And so we have to re-examine them, but make sure we're bringing our highest, our purest, our clearest, non-dual perspective to bear on them, so that we don't, reconfuse ourselves.
A non-dualist perspective is a good one to take forward. I'll do some thinking on that, because you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. They're separate.
Yes, I am. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, you are.
No. The not, yeah, and it's not me. It's, it's reality. As far as I can see, it's reality. Which I've had the good fortune to hang around with some teachers who've elucidated it very clearly, and yeah, it is. That A is more and more consistent with my own experience, and B makes stuff make sense, and nothing else does. Everything else leads into paradox and contradiction.